أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for granting you and I this existence and for granting us the opportunity to continue these weekly shows here on Enlight Media. We want to welcome you all to our Thursday night program, Elevated Spirits, and inshallah tonight we want to continue the discussion and the series of discussions that we want to have that we started last week regarding awareness and self-awakening. And inshallah, tonight, the topic that we have chosen as a part two to the discussion that we had last week about awakening the self is that of reclaiming yourself, in continuity with these series of discussions regarding self-awareness and gaining awareness in this life. So inshallah, as always, with our Thursday night programs, we will begin with some introductory comments and remarks by Brother Hassanain. And inshallah, tonight we're also joined by Brother Mohsin Dorius from Canada. So inshallah, we'll have a discussion on this issue of reclaiming yourself. But inshallah, to begin, I'll hand it off to Brother Hassanain to inshallah make some introductory comments, and then we'll continue the discussion from there on, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق ونور عرش أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا وسيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I begin in His blessed name for giving us this opportunity as honored creations upon which God has chosen us among many creations in the universe and has endowed us with so many faculties and blessings that for us to recognize it alone is in and of itself a blessing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to recognize this grace and mercy, not because He needs it, but because He wants us to understand the potentials that we possess as a human race and what we can achieve should we submit to His ways as He has decreed. And this conversation tonight, inshallah, with Brother Mohsin and Brother Amil, will focus on reclaiming ourselves from many perspectives. One, of course, the most fundamental is the principle of identity, self-identity, self-value. And inshallah, we'll talk from various angles, and we're going to share our experiences in the evolution of our own personal selves, coming to realization how much blessed we are. Many a times we become destructive in society, we become destructive in families because we have a very low sense of self-worthiness. And as a result, we tend to cause our own destruction, and we cause the destruction of those around us. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam, right? Allah has indeed chosen the Bani Adam. Among all His creations, He has given them وَفَضَّلْنَا. He has actually elevated them among most of His creations, that mankind has been a special being. And when the angels were commanded to bow to Adam, just the sheer gravity of that choice of God appointing this human being as His vicegerent on earth, as a Khalifatullah, is just simply cannot be put into words. So this conversation is about self-worthiness, and we suffer as a human race and damage ourselves and damage those around us because we have a low sense of worthiness, or if we are trying to compensate for that low sense of worthiness, we have a tendency to belittle others and to demolish those around us in order to try to sort of bring ourselves up. So there are two potential opportunities we have to sort of relatively raise ourselves. One is we work hard and really raise ourselves. The second, which is the destructive one, is the one where we put everybody down so that it appears that we are above somebody. The latter, is highly destructive, and Allah says, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ. By the hands of mankind, there is a lot of destruction that has occurred. What is the reason for that? Well, we have insecurities. This world is a very insecure world in and of itself from human transactional perspectives. when it comes to the physical realities of things, they're highly predictable and highly consistent. As Imam Ali alayhi salam describes to his companions, that this world does not cheat me. The sun does not cheat me. The moon does not cheat me. The air does not cheat me. These are all blessings of Allah, and they're predictable and understandable where they are and what it does. It's the human transactions that are unpredictable. Human beings promise, they break promises. Human beings have these moments of euphoric positivity and then this very depressed, negative sense of feelings. And then they tend to change their decisions when it comes to transactions, when it comes to their love for others, when it comes to anything that has some sort of a human transaction between humans. What that does is it creates a tremendous amount of questions and devaluation sometimes. We feel like, oh, well, this person is not predictable. And predictability and trust is one of the bedrocks of the levels of self-worthiness. So this introduction tonight is about what we're talking about is going to ground zero, and assuming the whole world turns their ways or faces away from us and they reject us. You see, that won't happen in general, but assuming the worst case scenario, and you feel very solitary, very alone, you feel very dejected, rejected. What do you do as a person under that condition? Is my worthiness dependent on how many people look at me, how many people approve of me, or is my worthiness somewhere else? This conversation is at this level. The majority of the world thinks that when others approve of you, then there is some worthiness to us. And if others don't approve of us, then there is a low worthiness in us, at least sense of worthiness. Whereas the Quran rejects this notion that popularity and publicity, and when you have a very massive population approving of you, that does not necessarily mean that you are approved in the eyes of Allah. Allah says, "Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum." The most honorable to Allah in the eyes of God is the one who is God conscious. And what is God conscious? God consciousness is the individual who has assessed the values of everything around them, including themselves, and has realized that the real value is with the one who gave me existence, the one who sustains my existence, and the one who will take me back, and the one who I belong to. That's the real value. The question, of course, is that how much are we willing to give ourselves towards Allah, given the fact that God has given us limited free will? How much are we willing to move in that direction? And I think that's the real key in this conversation. So when we look at the Quran, for example, you will see that there are very interesting verses pertaining to these. And we've quoted a few, we'll continue to quote more. But here is, to give you an example, for example, Allah says, "Inna Allah ashtara min al-mu'minina anfusahum wa amwalahum bi anna lahum al-jannah yuqatiluna fi sabilillah fayaqtuluna wa yuqtalun wa'dan alayhi haqqan fi at-tawrat wal-injil wal-Qur'an." So a simple example, simple explanation of this verse, and it continues, of course, but Allah says in Surah Tawbah, verse 111, Allah says, "Indeed, Allah has purchased from the believers their lives and their properties in exchange for what they will have in paradise. They fight in the cause of Allah." Here, by the way, fighting doesn't only mean on the battlefield, but they fight in the cause of Allah. And when it comes to the matters of truth, if there is a poison in society that requires eradication, Allah says, so they kill, and they're also killed. And it is a true promise binding upon him in the Tawrat and the Injil, which is the Gospel, and the Quran. And Allah continues, "And who is more true to his covenant than Allah? So rejoice in your transaction which you have contracted. And it is that which is the great attainment." So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is essentially telling us that if we are willing to sell, in Allah ashtara, God has purchased from the believers themselves. That giving of the self requires a lot of planning. It's not easy. You can't just wake up one morning and say, Allah, I'm giving myself to you. No, it requires a lot of experience. It requires trials. It requires tribulations. It requires knowledge. It requires experience. It requires the negative aspects, dejection, rejection, depression. It requires that feeling of loss where you just feel all alone and you thought your friend was the one who was going to save you. You thought your community was going to come to your, to your support when you needed them. Most of the time you'll find that's not the case. Most of the time people will promise and they won't deliver. There are those who keep their promise. And when we have those kinds of relationships, those are the best kinds of relationships we have in the world. And Imam Ali alayhi salam, through the Prophet, says that when you have that one friend who is worthy, where you can maintain a relationship in thick and thin, good times and in bad times, and that friend is with you, your supporter, and you are their supporter, this is the best kind of relationship one can have. But even that one, if it doesn't have Allah in between them, then it's a questionable relationship. Because for sure, any relationship in the universe that lacks Allah in it as the driving force, as the galvanizing agency, is suspect. It may have this facade of security, but I have never, and I stand to be challenged on this, I have never ever seen a relationship upon which an individual banks on another person's credibility without the need for this divine presence of liability, of honesty, integrity, and those are impossible without God. Integrity, liability, longevity of thought are impossible without a divine being, because what is that for? What, just to merge into a karma system that if I'm good, even after I've become something else in another universe, in another life, that my karma somehow will feed this? I mean, just the mere thought without a being that's managing this in directional forms just does not sit right. And even the whole notion of eternity as a system, where the system has decided to do something, and the system is not a being, not a worthy being, but just a system, is in my opinion, just a very washed down good thought. And that's not where we want to go. So inshallah, let's have this dialogue and we'll continue this conversation, and will contribute to many aspects and verses in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly questioning us on whether or not we're willing to understand our own values. So as a final conclusion to this, before I jump into the panel group, is that the foundation, the bedrock of all conversations is our own self-worthiness. And I want to make this statement, that if somebody comes to you or to me and says, how much are you worth? What's your worth? The materialist will say, well, I have a few $1 million in my bank account, so I'm worth X amount. Our president today is worth $1 billion, whatever. Oh, Jeff Bezos is worth, Zuckerberg is worth X amount. Okay. Are they really worth that amount? Because tomorrow they can lose it all in one hour, right? You have Elon Musk, who's a billionaire. Today is a billionaire. Tomorrow he could be a trillionaire. The day after he could be a zeronaire. So the question is, what's the real value of that person? Because when they lose their bank account, they lose their home, they lose their car, they lose their spouse, they lose their family, they lose all their children. And you look at that person and say, what are you worth? And is it predicated on material attachments to the individual? For those material attachments can detach and vaporize in a heartbeat. So then the worthiness is not what your bank account holds. It's not what you possess, even with families. Worthiness is in the individual self. And I will say this unequivocally, that if we took all the wealth in the universe, all of it, and you put it aside next to a simple one creation that was nothing before, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا, as mankind considered they were not worthy of being mentioned before, then God created إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه. We created man, right? وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم. They ask you, how will we become alive again when we've turned to dust? قل يحيي الذي أنشأها أول مرة. You tell them you did not exist and you were made. That value, my brothers and sisters, cannot be compared. No material quantity in the universe can replace the value of one life on this earth,
or in the universe. I don't care if black, white, tall, short, wide, narrow, it doesn't matter. Human beings' life is so valuable, and you go to that person and say, what is your value? You will see that in the actual transactional system of values, you cannot transact. And unfortunately, many of us don't see that. And we're willing to sell ourselves for cheap. And when our friends ask us to do wrong things, we feel that our value is based on what our friends have told us to do, because if I don't do that, I'm not valuable. And when people praise me and I feel valuable, then my value is completely dependent on what people say. And therefore, when people reject me, then I have no more value. Does that make sense? Think about it. Today, if I have 1 million followers and tomorrow I have 2 million followers, did I become double more valuable? But my body is the same. My heart is beating the same. My physical state is the same. My mental state is the same. Then how did I become twice as valuable? By what standard? Or assuming my 1 million followers became 500,000, did I now become half a value? No. Anything outside of myself is a blessing of God, and it helps me understand my own value. But my value and your value cannot be bargained for any price. So when Allah says, "Inna Allah ashtara," here Allah is saying you are so valuable that God has purchased you. God is the owner of the universe. Why would He purchase us if we're not valuable? So let's continue this dialogue on this basis, and we will see that the problems of society today among the youth and the adults is predicated at this level. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Hassanain, for that introduction on this night's topic of reclaiming yourself. And in continuity with tonight's discussion, we examine this concept of reclaiming yourself and the concept of this nafs, this ruh that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed within us, that is so honored, by the way, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Quran, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِن رُوحِي, that I breathed into you my spirit, ruhi. And when we talk about ruhi, of course, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not saying that He has a spirit, but this relationship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting is due to the value that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to this spirit, gives to this nafs, this ruh that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed within us. And when we examine the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly, in so many verses of the Quran, warns you and I and advises you and I to take care of this self and to claim the self that He has given us. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, alaykum anfusakum. O you who believe, upon you is a responsibility to take care of yourselves. La yadhurrukum man dhalla idha ihtadaytum. The one who is astray, the one who has erred, is not, he cannot misguide you or affect you if you are on guidance. La yadhurrukum man dhalla idha ihtadaytum. Ila Allahi marji'ukum jami'an. فَيُنَبِّئُكُم بِمَا كُنتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. That it is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you all will return, and He will inform you of what you have done. So we notice that in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces a fundamental principle, that upon us, each and every single one of us, regardless of gender, race, whatever form we may have as human beings, is a responsibility to take care of ourselves. It's a responsibility and a command by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we must take care and claim the self. Alaykum anfusakum. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in another verse in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, qu anfusakum wa ahlikum naran wa quduha an-nas wal hijara. That, O you who believe, save yourselves and your family from a fire whose fuel is men and stones. So Allah once again is admonishing us and reminding us to save ourselves. And notice how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the way, interestingly mentions that the fuel for the fire of hell is waquduha nas. The fuel is mankind, meaning it is you and I, due to our own actions and our own misdeeds, that humiliate our own selves and don't follow the commandments of God. By our own choices do we create our own hellfire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create this hellfire, as a form of amusement to punish us because this is what He wants. No, Allah says you are the fuel of this hellfire, your own misdeeds and your own foolishness. So when we talk about this concept of the self and reclaiming ourselves, really at the core of this conversation is the fact that you and I as human beings need to detach ourselves from all dependencies other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You find often as human beings, we are too concerned with the thoughts, the opinions, and the perceptions of any random, Tom, Dick, or Harry. What did this person say about me? How many likes do I have? Or how many people follow me? All of these external factors tend to determine our self-worth. And that's why you find the vast majority of people, especially preteens and teenagers, they fail to truly claim themselves and gain an identity for themselves, and hence you find them constantly going through various identity crises. They're constantly trying to change their appearance, to trying to change their personality, to try and fit in with some group, to give themselves some sense of self-worth, whether that's getting a different tattoo tomorrow, or a different style of haircut, or dressing a certain way, or when they go to the university, joining a fraternity, a sorority, or any various weird cult. Why? Because they're looking for guidance. They're looking for meaning in life. They haven't discovered the value of their own self. They haven't discovered the meaning of life, and they're looking for some external validation to teach themselves and give themselves that meaning. But it's amazing when you look from the religion of Islam, from the perspective of the religion of Islam in the Quran. It might seem contradictory and like a contradiction, but really true independence and true claiming of ourselves comes by surrendering ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this may sound like a contradiction, that I claim myself and I, gain authority and independence by surrendering myself. Yes, because we need to surrender and gain independence by surrendering to the only existence that is truly independent. If we examine everything else in the universe, it's temporary, it's limited, it's dependent. So by default, if we are to rely, to connect, and to depend on things which are in and of themselves dependent and limited, we are setting ourselves up for failure and disappointment. And thence, to truly claim ourselves, to truly gain meaning, to truly gain independence, we must connect with the divine. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. Be not like those who forgot Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and hence Allah made them forget themselves. Meaning when you forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have no God in the picture, no independent, true, the eternal existence, the wajibul wujud in the frame, then you forget your own meaning. And then you're constantly looking around life for meaning, for purpose. And Allah promises, by the way, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ. That whoever turns away from my remembrance, for them shall be a miserable life. No matter what you chase, that's how you find. We have even hadith from the Imams that tell us that, mankind truly are slaves of this world. They're constantly slaves of whether it's their own desires, as Allah says in the Quran, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Have you seen the one who takes his desires as his God? So Allah is constantly showing us that mankind, you and I, unfortunately, are often slaves to various things other than God. But the goal of life, to gain true independence, to truly claim ourselves, is to become slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why you find the Holy Prophet, even Nabi Isa alayhi salam, the first thing when we talk about how they identified themselves was as slaves of God. The first words that Nabi Isa alayhi salam uttered when he was commanded to speak by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to prove the innocence of his mother, the first thing he says to people is قَالَ إِنِّي عَبْدُ اللَّهِ, that I am the servant and the slave of God, because that's how he gained true value and independence. And there's so much more to discuss truly on this topic of gaining self-worth and reclaiming ourselves. And you find no matter how much external validation we look for in this world, it will never give us true satisfaction. Just recently I saw in the news that a 16-year-old TikTok star in India with over 2 million followers committed suicide. Now you might ask, why? Why does this happen? A 16-year-old who supposedly has the fame and the power that we all aspire for, have a lot of followers on these social media platforms, who's constantly taking videos of herself smiling, doing all kinds of funny dances, showing how happy she is, yet she commits suicide. And Allah promises, if you turn away from my remembrance, you're constantly looking for external validation, then one little minor thing that someone says can affect you so much. And you go into a spiral and you lose control of your life. So the conversation we are having is about how do we gain true independence and claim ourselves by connecting to the divine. And inshallah, we'll jump into this discussion with Brother Muhsin, who is joining us from Vancouver, as you know. And inshallah, he'll share some of his introductory remarks. Brother Mohsen, please, we're honored to have you. Go ahead. Brother Mohsen, you just need to unmute your mic.
Sorry about that. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's such a pleasure and honor for me to be here once again. And as you know, I mean, my family and I were deeply grateful and indebted to you and to Enlight Media for keeping the spirit of Ramadan alive in our homes through these programs. And we're very honored and very grateful for that. Regarding the topic of today, reclaiming yourself, I think you've said so much already, but there's so much more that we can say as well. One thing that came to mind when Brother Hassanain was speaking with regards to value, what's interesting is Imam Ali alayhi salam is quoted as saying that the value of your soul is Jannah, it's paradise. So don't sell it for anything less than Jannah, for paradise. And I feel that when it comes to the topic of identity, oftentimes we may forget what our primary identity is, which is being a Muslim, right? I am at a stage in my life right now where I am a father, I'm a husband, I may work, I may even identify myself as a philanthropist, a volunteer, so on and so forth. And for each one of these identities, you can spin off a particular purpose. I can say my purpose as a father is to raise good children. My purpose as a husband is to take care of, my wife, my household, my family, and so on and so forth. And what I find is what happens typically is when I become consumed or obsessed with these sub-identities, I tend to forget my primary identity and I tend to feel lost. So if I now become obsessed with my identity as a father, right, I may neglect my responsibility as a Muslim. If I become obsessed with my identity as a philanthropist, I may make that my life purpose to help others and do things, but may neglect my responsibilities again as a Muslim. And so what does it really mean to be a Muslim? And I think you hit it on the nail, Brother Amir, when you said it's submission, right? You need to submit. The whole purpose of life is to submit. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, very beautifully, he encapsulates this idea in Surah Al-Dhariyat, verses 55 to 58, where he says, he says, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ وَمَا أُرِيدُ مِنْهُمْ مِنْ رِزْقٍ وَمَا أُرِيدُ أَنْ يُطْعِمُونَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الرَّزَّاقُ ذُو الْقُوَّةِ الْمَتِينَ. And so here we see that Allah is first saying, remind them, because remembrance is good for the believers. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I didn't create you for any other purpose. I didn't create the jinns or the human beings for any other purpose except that they worship. So this, being a Muslim and being a worshipper of Allah, should be my primary obsession. And if I become obsessed with anything else, I lose myself. And so the question is, when I do feel like I'm losing myself, how do I reclaim it? And you reclaim it by remembrance, reclaiming it by reminding myself, look, this life is temporary, right? Like Imam Ali is saying, the value of your soul is paradise. One day you're going to die. You'll be accounted for what you're doing. So don't sell yourself short in this life, because what awaits you is abada, it's forever, right? Whereas this life is just a few years and you perish and you die, you pass away. And so I think it's an extremely important discussion that we can continue speaking about. One other thing that came to mind when Brother Hassanain was speaking as well regarding, what would happen if the whole world turned against me? Imam Zain al-Abidin has a very, very interesting hadith. He says, if the whole world were to perish and I was left alone with a copy of the Qur'an, I would not feel alone. I would not feel lonely. Why? Because the Qur'an is the direct word of Allah. When I engage in the Qur'an, I'm speaking to Allah and Allah is speaking to me. And so I'm alive, I become alive through this Qur'an, right? So as Muslims, I think it's important that we have this discussion and say, well, how can I become a better Muslim? What does it mean for me to be a real Muslim? Somebody who is not just knowledgeable about, the hereafter, but is convinced. Imam Ali, alayhi salam says, كيف يزهد من الدنيا من لا يعرف قدر الآخرة. How can he be an ascetic towards this dunya if he doesn't know the value of the hereafter? He says, زهد المرأة فيما يفنى على قدر يقينه فيما يبقى. He says, the zuhd of a person for that which is bound to perish, meaning this world, is directly linked to his conviction to that which is everlasting. So if you're not convinced that one day I'm going to die, and one day I'm going to be resurrected, and one day I'm going to be living in an abode forever, then of course it'll be very difficult to detach from this world. It'll be very difficult to say no to your friends when they invite you to do something wrong, or to be, detached from your, social media following and what so on. So I think it's really extremely important that, we keep these in mind and to constantly remember. The Quran is a book of remembrance. The Prophet was sent as a reminder. Reminder of what? Of what we already know. We know this. This is embedded in our fitrah, and we need to bring it back out to the surface and say, I am primarily a Muslim, and as a Muslim, I submit. And when I submit, nothing else takes precedence. I remember, and I'll conclude for now with this one story. I remember one time, we were at an MSA event in university, and one of the organizers and coordinators, he was hustling and bustling and trying to get the event going, and this was way past Maghrib. When the event was finally finished, he says, okay, that was a great event, alhamdulillah, now I can go pray. And we're thinking, now you're going to pray? Like Salah was like 3 hours ago. What are you talking about? Right? So if you become obsessed even with your role as a volunteer, or as a student activist or whatever, and even if it's in the name of Islam, it can move you away from what Allah truly created you for, which is His obedience. And so we have to be very careful with that.
Thank you, Brother Muhsin, for your comments. And you were mentioning regarding the verse of the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that surely I did not create mankind or the jinn except to worship me. I think this is an important point for us to discuss and expound upon, because oftentimes when people hear such a verse, they have a misconception of what the term ibadah means, and they think that, for example, Allah is saying that all I did was I created you on this universe. I created all these skies, heavens, earth, all this magnificent creation just so you can pray the 2 rak'ah salah for me, as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs our prayers. And it's important for us to clarify that it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who needs our prayers. And by the way, also, this term of ibadah, when the Holy Prophet, when Nabi Isa, as I mentioned, he introduces himself as an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a servant of God. Even in our prayer, we say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, that we bear witness that the Prophet, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In our society, you find slavery or being a servant has a negative connotation. But in the realm, when it comes with the relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being a servant of God is actually the highest honor. It's quite the opposite. And it's an extremely interesting dynamic, because you find in this world, if you're a servant or a slave of someone, you have, let's say, for example, no rights, and you're only benefiting your master, right? You don't really gain any benefit, because everything you're doing, all the work you're putting in is for the benefit and for the gain of the master. But when you examine our relationship in terms of being servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's quite the opposite. It's the highest honor to be a servant of God. And in fact, the only benefit is for us as the servants. Not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is getting the benefit. It's a very interesting slave and master relationship, where it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is not gaining any benefit from our servitude. It is only us who's gaining that benefit. Whereas in this world, with the negative connotation we have of slavery or servants, it's the master who's getting the benefit. So when we talk about وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, we should also emphasize that ibadah is not just praying salah or just fasting. These are forms of worship. Anything that we do for the pleasure of God, for the sake of God, is ibadah. So in reality, our entire existence and our entire life is ibadah towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if lived in the correct manner.
So let's jump into this conversation, brother. Amil and brother Mohsin. I'd like brother Mohsin first. What sort of evolution did you go through to come to this realization that our value is completely dependent on submission to Allah? We are all pretty much living in the West. I know you were, I think, born in Canada and raised in Canada all your life, in Montreal. And it's, you're not living in a Muslim country, obviously, right? We're living in the United States, and it's not a Muslim country. It's predominantly Christian and, of course, Jewish and other faiths.
What experiences did you have to come to such a realization, given the fact that we're not necessarily, sort of circled around a very strong Muslim community that has continuously taught us this? So if you want to share some of your experiences, I know, because I've known you for a long time, since you were a teenager, since you were quite young, actually. I think the first time we met was in New Hampshire. I think you had come to our camp in New Hampshire, and you were quite young at that time, a teenager, 17, I think, 16 or 17.
Sure.
And I remember that. And subhanAllah, look, you're a married man, you're a father now, and you've gone through this, and here you are on this panel discussing, and Brother Amil is in that same sort of channel, graduating from university. It was only 7, 8 years of age when, even younger when I first met him. And the point is that we are today, and we're asked that question: what gives you this level of certainty to think that reclaiming yourself is entirely valued at the submission towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and nothing else?
I think, and thank you very much for those kind words. I think there's a lot of things. It's a combination of things, really. And yeah, you're right. I was born and raised in Montreal. I attended a Muslim school for the most part of my elementary and high school years, but then went on to college and university after that. And in fact, the first time, some people sometimes they ask me, and I tell them, the first time I ever listened to Brother Hassanain, I was 15 years old. And he just completely opened my mind to Islam. Although I was in a Muslim school, typically at that time in that school particularly, you're taught prayer, you're taught, fasting, and you're taught some Quran, how many soldiers were in the Battle of Badr, and, things like that, that don't really necessarily relate to your day-to-day life, but I mean, you kind of learn it. We do face the same kind of challenges as anyone else. But the first time, I remember I was in grade 9, and I attended your lecture on Islam versus terrorism at Concordia University. And that just completely blew my mind away. I mean, this idea of, you were talking about morality and how Islam brings this concept, this idea of morality, and the moral system of Islam, as I remember, just completely baffled me. And that, I think, was my first introduction to Islam. And so I thank you so much for that. But as you said, even in my life, I've journeyed and I've gone through ups and downs, and there are many times that, I do feel lost, and sometimes I feel lost even with a capital L, if I could put it that way. And if I really want to pinpoint it to one thing, I would say, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X really did it for me, because at that time in my life, I remember, I was in a circle of certain friends. I had many different circles of friends, but I was very much attracted to, say, the hip hop culture and the things that it comes with. And so I kind of got caught up in it for a little bit. And I remember that at some point in my life, I didn't have work, I didn't have money, and it just so happened that I couldn't afford my cell phone anymore. And that was one of the biggest blessings ever, because it was almost like an immediate cutoff from all my friends. And at that same time, I was given the book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. And at that same time, I had just found a new job working at a coffee shop in downtown Montreal. I mean, in Sin City, if you want to think of it that way, working the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And many of what I found in the early life of Malcolm X, I was able to see firsthand at that coffee shop. I saw many homeless people, for example, that were addicted to all kinds of drugs and alcohol and whatnot. I saw many different individuals, who would finish their shifts at 3 o'clock and 3:30, come to our coffee shop and wait for the metros and buses to start running at 5 a.m., finishing from the clubs and the strip clubs and so on. And I feel embarrassed even mentioning this on this platform, but that was the truth. And as I'm reading Malcolm X's story, I'm seeing the progression that he's going through. And I can relate directly with some of his experiences. The thing about the hip hop culture and the music videos and whatnot, they glamorize a lot of that lifestyle, but they don't show you the ugly side of it. And here I am experiencing it firsthand. And so it was very transformational for me at that point in time. And what absolutely got me was towards the end of Malcolm X's life, when he discovers what they call Orthodox Islam, and then he comes back. So if we take a snapshot of his life, He's a straight A student in elementary school. He is class president, being the only black person in an all-white classroom. Then he gets lost in his teenage years and early adolescence. He goes to prison. In prison, he is such a troublemaker. He was such a menace that the other inmates of prison label him as Satan. He was so anti-religious that he gets the label of Satan. And then he discovers the Nation of Islam. He starts, stops eating pork, stops smoking cigarettes, and then joins the nation, gets out of prison, starts learning, acquiring knowledge. As you were saying earlier, the importance of acquiring knowledge. In fact, it is said that until the end of his life, you would never find him idle for 15 minutes, that he wasn't either reading a book or reading a newspaper or reading something. And then he becomes very famous, very popular with the Nation of Islam. And then, of course, there's the fallout. He ends up going to Hajj, and then he comes back. And now, he needs to reclaim himself, as we say. So, he's at a point in his life where thousands of people are watching him, watching his next move. He's discovering a new truth, and he doesn't hesitate for 1 second to relay that truth back to the people. In fact, he doesn't even wait. While he's in Hajj, he's writing postcards, writing letters about what he's discovering, even though it costed him his life. It costed him, suffering for his family. But when it came to the truth, he was unwavering. He did not resist at all for a second. And it was a very interesting video. They said, aren't you, in one of the videos on YouTube, they were asking him, aren't you afraid for your life? And he says, I have lived my life like I died 20 years ago. And I live my life today like I'm dead already. He has the courage of a dead man. And very similarly, the Holy Prophet said the same thing about Imam Ali. He says, if you want to see a dead man walking on this earth, then look at Ali. He had that kind of courage. And so for me, at least, I said, if the truth is something that Malcolm X is willing to die for, then it must be very valuable, right? Because, he could have easily, asked for forgiveness, got reinstated back into the Nation of Islam and received all the benefits, but none of that was important to him. So his loyalty to the truth.
And look what he did, right? He says that, I've died 20 years ago, yet he has left a legacy behind that continues to grow. It's inspired people like you and me and many others that I know, thousands and millions of people actually, and who continue to grow, in his direction. A person who's completely marginalized because he's coming from the African population, blacks, they're already seen as second, third-class citizens, right? He's fighting for that, and he climbs up. I mean, if you want to talk about somebody reclaiming their selves, when it comes to self-worthiness, subhanallah, Malik Shabazz was just an iconic figure, in my opinion, because he went through so many trials and tribulations and never gave up. The gem that was in him, that the world was trying to subdue and to break and to throw away. Instead, even though he was shot and became a martyr, his legacy continues to grow. And I think that's very powerful when a person really understands their value, that they leave this world. Not only did they just leave their world, but they left behind something that continues to grow. I think that's just phenomenal.
And one of the things that really stuck with me since then when I was reading, I couldn't believe how somebody could be known as Satan, in the early part of their life, and then be known as the shining prince of Islam. Mm-hmm. And that to me was phenomenal. And I think it really exemplifies the ayah in the Holy Quran that says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. That those who strive towards us, we will guide them to our ways. And our ways is interesting because sometimes you ask yourself, okay, well, why did he go through the Nation of Islam? Well, maybe he wouldn't have gotten his popularity, maybe he wouldn't have gotten his famous had he not gone through that way. Although that's not the truth as we believe it, but it was one of the ways in which he found the truth. So, it was such an eye-opener and such an important life lesson for me, reading through his story and experiencing what I was experiencing at the time, that Malcolm X becomes another focal point, that whenever I do feel lost again, whenever I feel like my priorities are not straight or I'm obsessing with sub-identities that are not as important, I refer back to him to gain that inspiration and say, well, what was it about him that brought him to that level? And, it was his sincerity, his determination, and his unwavering loyalty towards the truth. And that gives me
you know what's very beautiful about this conversation is the fact that, you see, if he was somebody trying to get popularity and in the process got killed, then maybe, you know, he was looking for attention. This man was already endowed with a gift of gab, meaning that his ability to articulate complicated ideas in the most eloquent of words is a gift that's, you know, Allah says, Allamahul Bayan, he taught us the art of expression, right? And Malik Shabazz had that. And he already had the power. He could have simply fallen into those, you know, powerhouses and maintained his position until today. Notice he sacrificed all of that for the sake of the truth. And I think that's the most powerful perspective of a leader like him, where he has this easy wealth. He has the access to control. He could have gotten any woman he wanted. He could have got a harem of women if he wanted them, right? He could have gotten 1,000 women if he wanted. He didn't want any of that. He wanted the truth. And he comes back and he exposes the truth that costed him his life. You know, you talk about identity and reclaiming yourself, and you speak only the truth, right? You know, and Allah mentions, the verse I mentioned in Surah Al-Bara'at, where Allah says, you know, they kill and they get killed because of the truth, and Allah loves them because they've sold themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think that's so beautiful. But one quick question, and Brother Amil, you can also jump in on this. You know, your parents sent you to an Islamic school. And it's interesting, ironically, when you're identifying yourself, when your parents have a vision for you and they want to sort of insulate you from all the negatives that are out there that may potentially harm us, many a youth find themselves choked. You know, my mom doesn't want me to go to public school. My dad doesn't want me to, you know, date, doesn't want me to go on, you know, senior prom. You know, the prom is a big thing. It's like a religion in this country, that if you don't go to the prom, you're a nobody, or you've been denied this great glory of life, you know, the day when haram becomes halal, right? And it's interesting when you examine that relationship, and because, you know, we run an Islamic school, you'll find that no matter how much you educate this child, that perception of a child that in public school or in those what we call non-Islamic schools, you know, you have the freedom to date, you have the freedom to do sort of the wrong things that Islam is forbidden. And I feel choked in this environment. And sometimes that sort of goes in the opposite direction, where the person starts to dislike Islam. So you go into an Islamic school, how much do you attribute that to the growth of who you are? You know, how much do you think is it has played in the role of who you are today? In other words, would you encourage your child to go to an Islamic school?
Yeah, I think more importantly, it depends on, first of all, it depends on the school. So yeah, I mean, I can't deny that having gone to an Islamic school, it has affected my life in many different ways. You know, who knows, if I went to a public school and I got to expose to even more haram, I could have easily lost my way. And in fact, I did go to a public school for a very brief period of time in my late years, but you know, by then I had already met you and started, you know, this quest and this search to, you know, to discover Islam and to learn more. But in fact, what was interesting is when I went to those public schools, I actually engaged in many debates, you know, with my fellow Christian friends, and you know, till today I consider them my friends because it was just amicable, but it was just so refreshing, you know, to kind of challenge, you know, another and see another perspective. I would absolutely send my kids to a Muslim school, but it would depend on the school. And what I'm learning now is that even if you do send them to a Muslim school, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that they will come out successful or religious or that kind of a thing. I think what's really important is the involvement of the parents and the selection of friends that you surround yourself with. I think that's more important than anything. You know, my wife, for example, went to a public school, you know, but today she's probably more religious than I am, you know, if I could put it that way. She's more, you know, but so it doesn't really matter. I have many friends as well who went to public school, and they're much better. They're, you know, eons, and they're my mentors, and they're only 2 years older than me. So I think the you know, the African saying that says it takes a community to raise a child, or a tribe to raise a child. It's more than just the school itself, but creating an environment where children can flourish and learn the deen and learn education and all of this, I think is priceless. I think it's absolutely priceless.
Amil, did you go to public school, or did you go to private school or public school?
I went to a public school, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I went to public school too, by the way. So in my time, there were no Islamic schools here. They
Right.
were just actually beginning to form. Actually, when I graduated from school, there was no Islamic school in the Eastern United States, to my knowledge. Or if it did exist, it wasn't something that I was aware of.
Just to make a quick comment, also, Brother Mohsen, as I was listening to your life journey about this topic of getting back to this topic of reclaiming ourselves, and each of us, as you mentioned, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Each of us can have a different pathway towards reclaiming ourselves. But as I was listening to your story and your sharing of the story of Malcolm X as he was reclaiming himself, I think the one common theme that I noticed in both stories was the importance of education. You were able to reclaim yourself and gain a better understanding of life through your reading of the autobiography of Malcolm X. And Malcolm X himself, by the way, when he went to prison, the thing that really helped him claim himself and broaden his vision and his perspective was the fact that he began to read. They say when he went to prison, he started to read the dictionary, every single word of the dictionary, copy the dictionary, word by word to improve his vocabulary. And then he began reading books of all kinds, right? Fiction, scientific fiction, nonfiction, all kinds of books. And then he himself stated that though I was in prison, I'd never been so free in my life. Meaning he was able to claim himself despite the fact that he's in prison and he technically has no independence, and he's in reality he's not free at all. He's locked up inside of a cage. But he states that I was never so free in my life because he was able to claim himself through education and through broadening his vision. And we know that eventually when he comes out of prison, after his knowledge and his readings, he eventually goes for Hajj. And we know when he goes for Hajj, once again his vision and his journey towards claiming himself completely changes, because he sees that this idea of the nation of Islam, that it is only the black man that has a place and the white man is the devils. He sees that this actually has no basis in the religion of Islam. And he saw people of all different kinds, all different races, all the different genders, all together wearing the same two pieces of cloth, all submitting before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's very interesting when we talk about practical steps towards reclaiming ourselves. One practical step right away that's so apparent is the importance of education, reading to help broaden our visions. Because oftentimes you find if we don't read, if we don't, for example, in this day and age, we also have, lectures and podcasts and different ways of consuming information. But if we're not consuming information and knowledge to benefit us and to help us, broaden our visions, then we become a victim of the circumstances that we grew up in or we were brought up in, right? If we grew up in a, let's say a terrible household, then, I'm a victim to my circumstance. And I think that, life is hopeless and I have no meaning to life. And why is everything like this? And I become so focused in that little bubble that I am in, not realizing that there's a grand universe out there for me to achieve. But the only way to get to that realization is by reading, by education, to help broaden our vision. And the second thing that you really mentioned was profound, was when you, for example, go through periods in your life that, where you said you feel a little lost, you look to Malcolm X, for example, his autobiography for inspiration. And I think that's another, practical step towards reclaiming ourselves, is when we feel a little lost, we look to the role models. For example, even the individuals like Malcolm X, but also the infallible role models that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, the holy prophets, the imams, that when we feel a little down, we remember their stories, their inspiration. How did they get inspiration? We remember when we feel tired in the morning, that, oh God, this is another, hard day. And, we're feeling a little sad and a little, we're a little in a mood of complaining. We remember that the Holy Prophet used to wake up every morning expressing gratitude, saying, Alhamdulillahi alladhi ahyana ba'da ma amatana wa ilayhi nushur. That praise be to the Lord who, gives us life after death, and to him do we return. So we remember these stories to gain inspiration and to help us in this process. Because, as we know, spirituality, claiming ourselves, is not a linear process. It's not every single day that I'm going to be exactly 2% better than I was yesterday, right? It's parabolic in nature. But really the goal in this process of claiming ourselves is when we are at the downs, to minimize the downs, and when we're at the ups, to maximize the ups.
So let me ask you, Amil, you grew up in a pretty focused family. Your parents are very, focused religion-wise. When they chose to the United States, they had a vision. They planned it. You were quite young. Your brother was even younger. When you were being raised in New York, were there times where you had this feeling like, my friends seem to be having a better time than me, and all this Islam and prayer and
religion and hijab. I don't know, I don't know if I think it's the right thing. Did you ever teeter on those ideas and sort of felt like I wish I was, because a lot of kids, teenagers, we all go through this. I know I went through temporal states of sort of spiritual agnosticism, where I was wondering, is this religion right? Have I been told something that's not really right? How do I know my religion is right? How do I know that the system that I follow is right? What did you go through? Explain.
I think really all of us go through these phases in life. As I mentioned, life is very parabolic in nature. I don't think there's really any human being that's fallible on this earth that can claim that, oh, I never had a single day in my life where I ever doubted God at all and everything was perfect, and my spirituality every single day, Salat al-Layl, prayer exactly every day on time, and I was just perfect. Every day I got better than the day I was previous. I don't think this is a fantasy. This doesn't exist, right? So all of us, we go through these phases in life, especially based on the circumstances that we grow up in, that, yes, my friends are doing this, why can I not do that? We all have these questions and we all have these doubts. So it would be foolish, or it'd be a blatant lie for anyone to say I never went through a single day in my life where I wasn't teetering on the edge. But I think the goal, as we mentioned, is when we get in these stages, we look for inspiration. We look for guidance.
So tell me about you, though. I know we all go through this. I'm interested to know, what did you go through? You're right, you're generalizing it, but I want to hear about you. Give me a story that you had where something made you doubt and then something else sort of brought you back.
In terms of a specific story, you're putting me on the spot and trying to make me come up with it.
If you ask me, I'll give you 50,000 of them. Every day you have something to tell. I was thinking about this, but you know what? I thought about it. It went that way. And then lo and behold, it became that. I mean, I have so many stories to tell, but the question is to you.
Right. Well, I can list also several stories, about how we go through periods in life where we sort of teeter on the edge. But the one thing I want to mention, yes, I want to mention, talking specifically about myself, is the one thing that helped me personally, get through the periods in my life where we began to doubt, or I went through, certain periods of lows, is the fact that we had, the system of the weekend madrasas, this big brotherhood system where we had individuals, when we went to these Sunday schools, who would look to, who were older than us, who were not our parents. Because, oftentimes when, let's say, my parents tell me something, especially when I'm young and I don't value my parents, I say, oh, they're just telling me that because they're my parents. They don't really know what they're talking about. So it really takes, having sort of this big brother or a role model or someone that you can look up to. And I had, yourself, many others in these weekend Sunday school programs that helped me, that, I've been where you are, and this is how I got through it. So I think that is one thing that really helped me, is having this big brotherhood system of people that I could look up to, people who I thought to be successful, who are well-to-do, who had held on to their religion, but are also successful in this world, and say, oh, I want to be like that. And that would, give me hope in the times of darkness. And I think we all have had role models in our lives, people and institutions. For example, the system of the camp, every year I used to remember the only thing that I would want to do every year was I would count down days to go back to camp, right? Because this was that zone. I know Brother Mohsin can probably attest to this as well, because this was the time where we felt we could connect with like-minded individuals, right? Through the utter chaos and darkness that is the world, we found that this was our little solace and our little, and Brother Mohsin himself was in fact, like an older brother to me. I remember many conversations we've had, when I was much younger, and he was younger, but of course, several years older than me as well. And I think these big brotherhood systems of, helping one another, helping those who are not necessarily related to, but also helping them, guiding them, is something that's extremely crucial, that we can help each other claim ourselves.
So I can testify to that. As Brother was saying, the first time I ever went to camp, after meeting him when I was 15, I went to the first camp in Massachusetts. And, initially I intended to only go for 3 days, and we were driving there with two other brothers. And I was so in love, with that experience. And I was exposed to, many different Muslims and Shias from all over the world, from Australia, I remember, from all over North America, from Europe. And it has such an impact on me that I remember calling my father and telling him, I'm staying until the end of the camp. Like, there's no way I'm coming home now. And I stayed. And Brother Hassanain arranged for my return with another brother who was from, I believe, from Toronto. And I stayed an extra week, if that. So And I was only 17, and I could barely afford a ticket back home. But it was so important for me to be in this environment because it was fulfilling me. Like for the first time, I felt like I can really connect and I can really learn. And I remember learning from Brother Ali Khalfan. I remember meeting him for the first time, and he taught me a very important lesson. I remember him telling me, there's a hadith that says, if you run after the world will run away from you, and if you run away from the world will run after you. And I remember I took it and I started implementing it in my life. Like I'm running away from this world. I don't want anything to do with this world. And I started seeing how my world was unfolding, and I was so touched by that whole experience. I said, okay, I have to come back when I'm older. And when we bought when Brother Hassanain and others bought the camp in 2008, it was so important for me to feel like I want to be a part of this, in any way I can. It doesn't matter what I do. I just want to be a part of it because of how much it was fulfilling me, and meeting the different people there. It was just something otherworldly, like nothing I've ever experienced ever in my life. No Muslim school has ever given me that kind of an experience, the same way I got that experience at the camp.
We only have a few minutes left in the program, but Brother Hassanain, I want to turn the tables, back on you and flip the question on you to share some of your personal experiences. We know you've talked about this many times, and we only have a few minutes left, but inshallah, as we wrap up the program, how you mentioned, your university years and how, you always mention the stories of you walking through the hallways and seeing people with, shirts of different Greek letters and saying that, then to you viewed that as them saying that, I am a nobody, and how the process and the journey you went through to sort of claim yourself, going to university, away from home, and some of the experiences that you went through.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I mean, I could, honestly, I should write books about these experiences because those were the profound moments that sort of, the divine guidance comes through those, right? كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Every day there is a sign, there is an indicator, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us in mysterious ways, even through animals, through creations, and you can see directions of the divine. So I've had a lot of stories to tell. And growing up in the United States, I didn't grow up in an Islamic school. My parents were the foundation of religion for me. It was the books that I read and the scholars that I looked up to that became the foundation of my of my learning environment. And we didn't have camps. We didn't have Islamic camps. I didn't grow up in Islam. In fact, I used to go away with my non-Muslim friends to camp, and I would spend a week with them. We would be playing tennis and water skiing and doing all kinds of activities, not realizing later on that those were all training that Allah was giving me for me to utilize when we do start the camp. For then when you're taking kids on the lake and you know how to water ski and you know how to do certain sports and you know how to play tennis, these all become great means by which you attract the young generation and to show them, look, you're worthy of something. Let's go skiing, let's go water skiing, let's play tennis. And by the way, this is for the brothers and the sisters. So we didn't limit ourselves just to the brothers. It was for both genders, because I feel that empowerment should be given to both sides within the parameters of morality, where you're not violating the Sharia and the Haya. You don't want to be, immodest, to use the right term. And I went through my own personal journeys, questioning my own religion, questioning Islam, looking at the atheist and saying, I wonder if the atheist is right, or the agnostic who says, well, we can't be right. We can't be wrong. We can't be right. Okay, maybe that's where it is. Then I would look at Christianity, and I used to go to Bible studies and say, well, I wonder if the Christians are right, and I would study the Torah, and I said, I wonder if Judaism is right. And all of these, and for me to approach these questions in life was fantastic. And I had people like Shaykh Mutahari, Allama Tabatabai, who just lays the foundation. And of course, the Quran, the Holy Prophet, Ahlul Bayt. I used to read these and say, I wonder if they're right. I wonder if Imam Jafar Sadiq is right in what he says here. I wonder if Imam Ali in Najul Balagha is right. So I would apply it. And in my university, I got challenged in every direction, from every possible nuance, thought. I was challenged. And it was almost like Allah is putting me in the thick of it and said, go ahead, talk about it and see if they're right. And I remember Brother Mohsin used to call me sometimes and used to argue with me like an atheist. Brother, but how do we know? And I knew that you were going through what I was going through. On one side, you were trying to take the side of the atheist just to see if there was credence there. But at the same time, you weren't really there. You were sort of trying to, feel out the foundation of Islam and say, is this really true?
Have we concocted this religion? And subhanAllah, I think that experience is so profound in life. But to summarize this this growth process and evolutionary process, what we were denied is what we should give to others. I didn't have a camp. So I said, you know what? It's important to put a camp together. We didn't have an Islamic school. It's important to give an Islamic school, because those were the things that if I had, maybe I would be a much better person. Not that I'm a better person now, but you get the point. But by the same token, not having had it has given me this enormous power to understand when you don't have it. So when I see kids coming to our school and they're complaining about going to an Islamic school, I look at them, I said, you have no idea what you're talking about, because tomorrow when you're denied this, you will see its values. So in summary, what you mentioned, Brother Mohsen, was having that mentorship, right? Brother Amil, you mentioned you had mentors, the big brothers, the big sisters who sort of guided you. They gave you direction. When I was growing up, I didn't have any of that. My parents were the only mentors I had. I really didn't have a big brother. I didn't have anybody to pick me up and take me places and to teach me anything. There was none of that. I had to sort of self-learn a lot of these things, and I didn't have it. And I look back and I said, subhanAllah, I didn't have it, but yet I got involved in it. If this is not divine hand preparing me for something greater, then how is it possible that I did it? So that's why I have so much, empathy when I see kids who don't have that guidance, who don't have that peer relationship, or who have bad friends, and I wish I could create that environment for them, like camp. Look, everybody talks about camp. What was about camp? You just walk in. I had a sister, for example, wrote me a letter. Just a quick example. And before she was coming to camp from Canada, she said, I just want you to know I do not wear hijab. I will never wear it. I am not convinced. I'm coming to camp because my mom wants me to come, but I'm just warning you. Don't try to convince me about hijab or religion, but I'm coming to have a good time. Is that okay? I said, welcome. But I just want you to know, you're going to have to practice some modesty, just as a general rule, just like you go to a church, you go to a museum, you go to a library, you're supposed to practice silence and so on. She said, okay, no problem. I'll do that. And in that camp this was in, not in New Hampshire, it was in, I think it was in another state. What happened is she wrote me a letter at the end of the camp. And we didn't preach Islam. We practiced it. And it was amazing. She wrote me like a 2-page letter. She said, nobody pushed me towards this religion. I have pushed myself because I'm so in love with the beauty of this religion. And I've decided I will never take my hijab off. Like, subhanAllah, wow. We never sat with her. None of us ever approached her sister. We know you don't wear hijab. You're going to go to hell. Your hair is going to burn on Judgment Day. None of that stuff. She was just having fun, relaxed, meeting people. Oh my God, it was incredible. And when I read that letter, I remember tears were rolling down my face. Like Allah is talking to me through this girl and said, look, this is the value of your religion. You don't have to preach it down people's throats. You don't have to give them candy to attract them. Just be real. And it's so beautiful and attractive that people will long for it so much that this year we didn't have camp. We had to cancel camp. And I had so many people calling me, is there any way we can do something on the side, like a few family members? We just miss it so much. Even the school, Wise Academy, when our school got closed because of COVID, but so many parents said, oh my God, we never understood the value until this pandemic, where now our kids are at home. We realized the value of what we had. So I think there are lots of stories to tell, but education, as Brother Amil mentioned beautifully, knowledge empowers. The Holy Prophet said the most beautiful endowment God has given the human race is their intellect. You walk into a room, nobody knows you. Start talking. And if you talk intelligently and you've got that ability to connect the dots, everybody starts looking at you like, who are you? We like you. You're amazing. Your beauty starts to shine. The most beautiful thing a person has is their intellect, not the outer garb. The outer garb is important. But I've seen people go to these, gala events where they're fully decked out and they come in limousines and in, $500,000 cars, but they're not beautiful. It's when they talk and their intelligence comes out, their words of wisdom, their akhlaq. Now you penetrate this outer shell and you say, wow, that's the person I like. So education, extremely important. You want to reclaim yourself, educate yourself. Know your words. Be able to continue a conversation. Somebody says, have you read that book? No, what is that book? I've never read a book. Okay, well, how am I going to have a conversation now? Do you know about it? No, I don't know. Being honest is okay, but every time you say, I don't know, what Imam Ali alayhi salam says, there's a beautiful story that sort of attracted me. He was preparing his soldiers for a battle. And he looks at one of the soldiers and the links on his armor was broken because, from previous battles. And Imam puts the sword on it and says, fix this, for the enemy will strike there. Do not let your enemy penetrate your weak spot. Fix this. And that to me was so profound. So, and I took that, Imam Ali saying to his soldier, fix the link, the broken links. To me, it was my ignorance, my lack of understanding, my inabilities, my weak points, my silly attractions, my ignorance towards things that will harm me, my love. Like Brother Muslim mentioned, I ran away from the world. What you meant was you ran away from the negatives of the world, right? You embraced the positives of the world, but you rejected the foolish attractions, right? And what happens then is that when somebody says, do you know this? You say, no, I don't know this. What the person is saying is, you've got a broken link. Go fix it. So when you leave, or somebody uses a word, what was that word that you just used? Oh, I like that word. You like it? Go learn it. Next time you use it, or next time you know its meaning, that's reclaiming yourself, because now you're taking charge of yourself. So many a times people say, oh, I don't know what that is. Okay, then they go back, and then a month later you ask them, did you know? No, I don't know that. So how long are you not going to know? Don't you think you should know? At least you should take the attempt to say, I didn't know yesterday, but let me try to know today. Or maybe tomorrow I'll know it. But that acquisition of knowledge is so critical. And there's so much to talk about, right? But self-introspection to validate ourselves and to say, yeah, look at Malik Shabazz. He was totally in the gallows. Look at people like Nelson Mandela, for decades in prison. You feel like you're a nobody. Look at our imams, in prison, being butchered. Did they ever look back and say, no? Imam Zainul Abidin, witnessing his own father, his own brothers, his own family butchered. Did he ever lose hope? No. He gave us gems and he left legacies behind. How do you do that? You've got to claim yourself. How? Well, check your own integrity. Don't follow blindly. And the fact that Allah has given us so many gifts, the Quran, the peers, the communities, the leadership. We've got great scholars who've written books, thousands of them. All you got to do is read a few of them. Start somewhere, and you'll be surprised how much you will grow in life. I think that's very important for us to pay attention. And then, I'm always so happy when I hear people, we went to camp, our lives changed. I'm really saying, I was doing countdowns. Yeah, it's classic, isn't it? And it's not in our camp only. Christian camp, Jewish camps, they all have tremendous impacts, because that's where you identify yourself. But what better can you identify than you come to a Muslim camp, halal food, decency, God is spoken about, but in universal ways, where we've had Christians, atheists come to our camp. We had a Christian boy coming from Grand Rapids. He said, I'm a Christian. I want to join your camp. Can I? I said, yeah. He said, but I don't pray. I won't pray. I said, no problem. You can watch us pray if you want. You can stay in your room if you want. You're welcome. He was the first person in Pennsylvania. He used to come to our camp in Pennsylvania. He was the first person at Fajr Salah, sitting on the bleachers in the gymnasium where we were praying. He would have his book and his pen ready to take notes, right? And in every prayer, he was sitting taking notes. Nobody proselytized him. Nobody went to him and said, hey, you're a Christian, you should become Muslim. No, we all loved him. He loved us. The following year, he came to camp. He told me, look, I'm a Muslim now. I've done Shahada. 17 years old, 17. Did Shahada. I said, why? Why did you do Shahada? He said, I fell in love with the camp. I fell in love with the spirit. I want more of it because I found the truth there. So it's not only for us as Muslims to find the truth. It's just in the congeniality, in the spirit of the beauty of God's creation. And I can, like I said, this issue I can talk forever. I'll never get tired.
There's so much more to discuss, but we're, of course, are out of time. Just to briefly summarize our discussion, this concept and this journey of reclaiming ourselves, we must recognize, firstly, it's a lifelong journey. We know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal insanu innaka kadihun ila rabbika kadhan famulaqi. This is struggle upon struggle. It's constant. It's never ending, but that's the beauty of the struggle. It's constantly going in a trajectory towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And on this journey of reclaiming ourselves, really, it's not linear, as we mentioned. It's parabolic. And there are times where we're on ups. There are times that we're on downs. And in order to help us reclaim ourselves, we mentioned through our experiences and our stories about the importance of education, seeking knowledge, looking at role models, people to look up to who have been through what you have been through and who have, who are successful, who are, or the infallible role models as inspiration to help guide us. And even the importance of, introspection, retrospection, etc., etc. And then this conversation can go on and on. But Brother Mohsen, before we end, if you wanted to share any final concluding remarks.
Something I think, like you said, there is so much that we can say regarding this topic, and there's a lot of things that were coming to my mind that I want to share, but with the limited time, one thing that I think is really important is to remember how much Allah loves us and how much He is yearning for us to come back towards Him. So much that He says, if you just take one step towards me, I'll take 10 steps. I'll come running towards you. And I think that's really important to remember, because sometimes when we do feel lost, we might lose this, we might lose our sense of balance, so to speak, or we might feel overwhelmed with what we need to do and what we don't. And Allah's pretty much just saying, look, just come to me, take that first step, and I will bring people together. I will bring you the mentor. I will bring you exactly what you need for you to grow. And in our case, we needed to hear Brother Hassanain. We needed to attend the camps. I have, so many other mentors like Sister Fatima Ali and, my other, the tribes that we're part of. There's so many people that have affected me very positively in my life. And it's all because I find, at least in my experience, I come back to Allah and say, Allah, you help me. Help me find the right person. Help me find the right time. Help me find the right circumstances that I can grow towards you, that I can love you, that I can, and Allah just makes it work together. And I think that's also really important to remember, is that, is how much He yearns for us. As much as we think we want to yearn for Him, He's the one yearning and waiting for us. But yeah, I would love to continue this conversation, inshallah, in subsequent sessions, because like we said, there's just so much that we can cover. But alhamdulillah, thanks again for having me here today, and inshallah, I'm looking forward to being here again, inshallah, if I'm welcomed. And thank you so much.
You're always welcome, not if I'm welcome. That's Brother Mohsen, you are the spirit. We chose this session, Elevated Spirits, to have you, because you're one of those who elevates our spirits. Honestly, you're one of the best human beings I've ever met. Honestly, I have a few who come on these panel groups, and subhanallah, honestly, your humbleness, your kindness, your sincerity is impeccable in so many ways. And I feel very blessed to have this connection with you. And so, inshallah, we'll have more conversation and more sessions like this with you and with the other sisters and brothers in our communities, and to talk about these journeys. I think sometimes getting into those individual issues that we went through that helped us get out, that sort of are profound in our heads. And when somebody asks us, what changed you? And you keep coming back to that event or something, I remember Cat Stevens was asked that question, what made you to become a Muslim? And, Yusuf Islam, and he said, I was drowning, in the English Channel. And I prayed. I didn't believe in God at that time. And I prayed, and I said, if you're out there, save me and I'll find you. He said, and within a few seconds, I was like on the shore. And I started to search for God. And my brother gave me a copy of the Quran, which he got when he went to visit the Masjid al-Aqsa. And I opened it, and I knew this is where I need to be. He was in numerology, and he was studying all kinds of sciences and so on to try to figure out the existence of God and the importance of a divine being. And I think that's all it takes. But I think it takes a sincere heart. A person like you, a person like Ahmed, I look at, there's that sincerity, that desire, the unequivocal desire with nothing, camouflaged. It's real. Just tell it like it is. And that's why I like you so much, Brother Mohsen. You're a realist, and that's beautiful. And we need more like that. And I know you are a mentor. I know Brother Amil too. You're all mentors for our next generations. I pray that we all become a party to this mentorship, so we leave a legacy behind
sometimes on a grand scale, like a legend, the way Malik Shabazz was, the way even people like Martin Luther King, for example, among the Christian community. What a powerful figure. He played, and his words of wisdom were just incredible. And we have so many like them, right? But of course, nobody can top the Holy Prophet himself and his Ahlul Bayt. I don't think there's any community in the world out there combined that can topple the wisdom of just these besides our prophets, Isa alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam. Sister made a comment that this is their birthdays, Prophet Isa's birthday and Prophet Ibrahim's birthday. And I feel like every time we talk about Allah, we talk about spirituality, and we talk about elevating ourselves towards Allah, we're paying tribute to these people, whether they died, or whether they were born. I think that's the key to the elevation of spirits. May Allah bless us all.
Inshallah, we want to thank you, Brother Mohsin, for joining us. It was an honor to have you on. And as always, we want to thank all of our viewers for your continued participation. Inshallah, we'll end with a short dua. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. With that, inshallah, we will conclude tonight's program. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.